for everyone listening, how did you get into the business as a writer?
So I had a light bulb go off in college. I took a film production course and I was like, this is it. Got it. This is it. This is my life. I'm making movies. I'm telling stories. I loved it. I loved the technology. I loved, the whole idea of the narrative and just mythological archetypes and telling epic stories, all of that. Got the bug. I thought I was on a directing track. I was like, I'm going to direct. I'm going to be a director because I just loved, just that whole thing, just controlling the whole process, particularly post-production. Got to Hollywood, moved out here, and did some independent, music videos. Did a couple of music videos as a director, and was hustling, and actually did a couple of low-budget features. I did a gothic horror movie called Grandmother's House, which was great, and another genre movie called Hired to Kill, which was Dirty Dozen with women.
Nice.
Both were the same producer, but it was kind of like this thankless thing where it wasn't kind of getting me to the kind of stories that I wanted to tell. And meanwhile, sort of on the side, I was kind of doing some writing. I never saw myself as a writer. That was so interesting. It actually took me years to realize, I'm a writer. Even after Waterworld, I didn't realize I was a writer. But I had developed this story, and interestingly, the genesis of the story did come out of the low-budget world. Mm-hmm. Up until that point, in my early and mid-20s, I was thinking, what can I do for no money? Like, what can I do in one location on a weekend? Like every young filmmaker's thinking, like, what can I contain, small. And this one guy invited me in for a meeting. He worked for Roger Corman. His name was Brad Cravoy. Mm-hmm. And he actually went on to produce a bunch of the Farrelly brother movies, pretty big producer. But at the time, he was kind of hustling and raising money for Roger Corman by any means necessary. So in this case, he said, okay, Peter, here's the deal. I've got some South African money, okay? I got some South African investors, and they want to make a Mad Max ripoff. If you write it, I'll let you direct it, okay? So it was like, okay. I'm being asked two moral questions here.
It's a straight up Mad Max ripoff. Got it. Okay.
Yes. So am I willing to take the South African blood money? Okay, because it was still the apartheid era.
Oh, geez, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, so there's that. And then second, was I willing to do a Mad Max ripoff? Okay, so unfortunately, the answer to the first question was yes. Mm-hmm. If it was going to get me my directing break, whatever, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. Second question was I willing to write another one of these Mad Max ripoffs that were a dime a dozen that everyone was developing, that was, everyone was bringing to MIPCOM and AFM. Here, I got this. I got gasoline blowing up in the desert. I got old beat up cars. I got machine guns. It was just completely oversaturated and boring. And it wasn't exciting to me. But I remember walking, in the marina here in LA. And a bunch of us had chartered a boat or wherever we're going to go out sailing, whatever. And I looked around and I was like, I got one of those light bulbs. It was like, on water, Mad Max on water. That's how we redefine the genre.
Sure.
Happens all the time. It's like, Star Wars is a Western in space. It's like you take something.
Die Hard on a boat, Die Hard in a building, Die Hard in a plane. Yeah.
Die Hard with a blind guy or whatever, change up one element and it becomes a completely different story. Because we are rehashing the same stories over and over again anyway. Mm-hmm. And Waterworld is a Western. I'll get to that in a second. But I did come up with that idea, which is let's set it on water, a flooded planet. How cool would that be? Boats, jet skis, boom. So I went back to Brad and I said, okay, Brad, here, I got it. We're going to do Mad Max on water. And he looked at me. Are you out of your freaking mind?
It's going to cost a fortune.
Yeah, a movie like that, literally, it's going to cost us $5 million. No.
Easily $5 million.
Easy. He wanted to spend like 50 grand.
Right.
100 times his budget. No. So he said no. And I said, I still like this idea. So I wrote it on spec. And I was so fearless. When you're young and you don't know the rules and you don't know all the rules that you're breaking, that's a good time. That's a beautiful creative time. And I think I just cranked out a draft in 3 weeks. And then at the time, I knew no one. I knew no producers, no writer. No. My cousin was dating a writer who was working on a TV series. And I said, would you take a look at this? Would you read it? The guy read it and goes, He gave me a meh. And I was like, a meh? Oh, it was a knife in the heart. So I said, okay, I'll put this on a shelf. I'm putting this on a shelf. And I went off and I pursued these other opportunities that I mentioned, the 2 low budget movies, okay? In the second movie, I was so disillusioned. I was like, oh my God, this is a path to nowhere. Do I really want to do these movies? And I opened the drawer, I dusted off the script, and I said, this thing is not bad. I wrote it in 86. In 89, I took another look at it, and I was like, this is not bad. I did a quick rewrite. By the way, I wrote the original draft on the original Macintosh computer, the one, the 1984.
Sure. Nice.
Anyway, I dusted it off. I rewrote it on a slightly later version of the Mac, I think. And then it was one of these just Hollywood dream stories where, like, at that point, I did know a few producers. I gave it to one. They were like, this is really good. Oh, my God, I'm going to give it to this guy. I got an agent. I got a lawyer. Before I knew it, it was handed to John Davis, who was a big producer, who had a deal at Fox. His father ended up buying Fox later, but that's a separate story. His office was in the Die Hard building, and he said, I know who's perfect for this, Larry Gordon. So he marched into Larry Gordon, and, within 3 weeks, I had a deal, and it wasn't just one, they bought this spec script, and then my crazy agent at the time, who was at ICM, and then he moved to CIA, in the room said, you like this thing? You know what his next project is? I don't even want to talk about it, but I want you to commit to 2 pictures. He got me a 2-picture deal, sight unseen, on a script that didn't even exist in my imagination. I had
wow.
Shit. So and then began my baptism by fire, because I was so naive at the time that I didn't even realize that a writer could be fired. I thought, I'm the writer.
It's my idea. What are you talking about?
Yeah, exactly. So, development hell. It was just crazy. All the executives got in there. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a piss on the script. Get this idea, do this, darker, grittier. Blah blah blah. More edgy, more Mad Max, more this. And I ended up doing 7 drafts. Some new ideas came into it that were good, but mostly it was like horizontal changes, or actually kind of a diminishing of the sort of energy. And
a watering down, if you will, no pun intended.
It was a watering down. It was a watering down. And I'll take a sip of water.
Yeah.
And then, there was a series of writers that came on. So when Kevin Reynolds and Kevin Costner came aboard, I had one creative conversation with Kevin Reynolds, and then he basically said, look, I think it needs a new voice. We're going to bring in another writer. And of course, Kevin Costner had someone in mind. They brought in, whoever. I don't remember the sequence exactly, writers, but there were 5 writers who actually participated in the arbitration. There was one writer, Joss Whedon, worked on it without any credit or whatever. He was like a script doctor, literally on set. But ultimately, there were 20 drafts. And, the thing was arbitrated, and, I got, of course, first position credit, and I shared with David Toohey, who, ended up doing, some good work on the piece.
Now, do you have the original script still, like your version of it?
I do have it.
Is it available anywhere for anybody to read?
It might even be on the web. People have seen it. It's been the subject of various. I mean, we're probably going to get into this, but we did various arbitrations at one point. We had to find the story of origin and trace it back, this is the quintessential Hollywood story. 3 months before production. So I sold the script in 1990. They went into production in 94, and in 95. The movie came out, and in fact, we're celebrating the 25th anniversary this year. 3 months before production in 1994, Chuck Gordon, Larry's brother, who was also a producer on the movie, took me out to lunch just to kind of let me know what was going on and stuff, and connect. And he said to me, Peter, the deal is that we still don't have a script that's as good as your original spec script. I was like, you've got to be kidding.
Just use the real.
Yeah, shoot the original. Exactly. Thank you. Shoot the original. And he said, too late. The train has left the station. We've built the sets. We've committed to producing this other script, and even though it's not as good as your original, it loses the energy when you write it into the ground. There's something about original drafts.
Well, let me ask you a question, because how old were you when this happened?
Let's see, I was around 27, I think.
All right, so that's fairly young to be thrown into the deep end of the pool here, because you're at this point playing at the upper echelons of Hollywood, and you're playing with some really big players of the day. So when someone, I want writers listening to understand that it's not always the best script that gets made. It's just not. There's politics, ego, money. There's so many things that get thrown into the mix. And that he took you out to lunch and said, hey, I wish we never got anything as good as your original script. That's a great definition of Hollywood, isn't it? Like, it's like, oh, we had something really good. We watered it down to appease all of the egos and all of the politics involved. And now we're just, man, wish we could just go back to what we originally bought. Now, unless you are Joss Whedon, Christopher Nolan, Tarantino, Sorkin, very established screenwriters, and even they, depending, not Tarantino as much, but maybe even they still have to deal with some of this stuff. They would have had the juice to push back a bit. You had no juice because you were just happy. You were happy to be there.
Yeah, and also this goes to another question that is really a point to make, which is in the Hollywood structure, you're assigning your copyright. You give away your copyright.
They're buying it out.
Yeah, and they buy you out, which is unlike Europe, and unlike playwrights, In Europe, writers retain their copyrights and they give a license, an extended license, to the producer. And playwrights control their material on Broadway. They own the copyright. In Hollywood, the pact with the devil, the money is big, the upside is big, there's fame, fortune, all these things, but you are giving away your copyright, which means they can do whatever they want with the material. And this is going to tie into a conversation that I hope we get to, which is this whole idea of separated rights, which is there are certain rights that the writer retains, even in the Writers Guild contract, such as novelization. You have the right to turn your work into a novel. Dramatic stage rights. You have the right to adapt your work into a play version of the script.
Right.
But other than that, they have free reign.
So you're a few months away from production. You've been, obviously, there's been a barrage of writers on board at this point in the game, and now you've got Kevin, who at that point was already an Oscar-winning director, or write. I'm not sure if he didn't write dances, right?
No, yes, but he's not directing.
No, I know. Kevin Reynolds is directing. Yeah, I know, but he still was a Oscar-winning. Yeah, he was it in the 90s. It was
Prince of Thieves. He was coming off of a hit movie, Prince of Thieves, the Robin Hood movie. So
right, he was and Dances with Wolves before that, and Field of Dreams, and all the stuff that he'd been doing during that time. He was in the heyday of thing. So Kevin, from what I understand, I've spoken to a few people who worked with him before, after, and during that time. He pretty much controlled the show. Like whatever Kevin wants, Kevin gets. So if he wants a new writer to come on board, guess what, everybody? That new writer is coming on board. He wielded a lot of power, and that's also the height of the movie star, the movie star with the movie star power.
Yep.
Not as much today. There are still obviously movie stars, but not. Before you could literally put Kevin Costner reading a back of a cereal box, and you got 20 million opening.
Okay.
I mean, essentially, that's the way it worked back then. So, how are you? So the movie gets started, and they're producing it, and I mean, I'm assuming you went on set.
I did.
So, okay, because the stories are legendary of how, I mean, you're shooting on water, that is rough. It's a rough. You're working in the elements. It wasn't a tank for the most part, if I'm not mistaken, right?
No, it was no tank at all. In fact, here's the deal. I understand that Kevin Reynolds, in pre-production, decided to call the one guy who could give you a lot of advice about how to shoot on water. He called Spielberg, and he said, "Hey, Steven, here's the deal. I'm doing Waterworld. We're doing it on water. Do you have any advice for me?" Spielberg said unequivocally, "Do not shoot
Shoot
on
on.
fucking water. You know, don't. I mean, in other words,
Don't
okay,
do
you're
it.
going to get the vistas, set out second unit, get your big shots on water. You know, whatever your drones, your helicopters. We didn't have drones back then, but do everything on a tank, everything in a tank, or in a stage, everything, everything, everything." And Kevin Reynolds decided to disagree with Spielberg, and it just was a bizarre decision, but I understand it. I want to defend Kevin Reynolds and Costner. I'm sure Costner was part of that decision. They wanted the verisimilitude. They wanted that gritty, no denying it. We are out in the freaking middle of nowhere
I got
water
it.
field. And they did get that. They did
Oh yeah.
get that. This is godforsaken, flooded planet, city,
Right.
It's out in the middle of nowhere. But the cost of that, the price of that was that, they went wildly over budget. And also there's a certain ugliness to the movie because, the first shot of the day always ended up being like a 11 o'clock or noonday sun, even though their call was like 6 a.m. or 5:30. By the time they got all the freaking boats out there, the picture boat, the catering boat, the prop boat, this boat, you're looking at 11, and then you got this ugly sun. So they really ended up getting like 5 or 6 setups a day, and then the one beauty shot. Like as the sunball was setting in the thing, they would get that one beauty shot. And that was it. That was their day.
And I mean, there was a storm that hit that, right, too.
Yeah, just before production. So here I'm going to set up my visit to the set. So
Okay.
about 3 weeks into production, I show up on set, and so excited. This is my first feature. I mean, there was already a little bit of negative press, going around, but I didn't care. Press is press. It was so exciting.
Sure.
Huge movie. And I flew to Hawaii where they were shooting, Big Island off the West Coast, and I show up, and I'm getting this energy like from the crew, like everyone is like glaring at me. I'm like, why are they glaring at me? And everyone was like, that's the fucking writer,
That's the guy who put us through this hell.
Exactly. That's what it was, and I was
That's
like,
amazing.
I suddenly realized that, here I am arriving 3 weeks into production, and they're like 2.5 weeks late. They're already, all they got was like 2 or 3 days of shooting, 3 weeks in, and everyone saw the writing on the wall. It was a disaster. A couple of weeks before production, that enormous set, that floating set that they had built, sank. It sank, and they had to rebuild it from scratch.
Yeah, that's the Dennis Hopper like fort thing.
Yeah, no, not the Dennis Hopper thing. The good guys, the eight.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, that thing sank, and it was just a little bit of a disaster, in that way.
So just for everybody listening, if you're doing a movie and on day one you're a page behind, you're already in trouble. You got to pick that up. If you're 2.5 weeks in and you've got, what was it, 3 days shoot or 2.5 days of actual shooting?
3 weeks in, they had gotten 3 days of shooting.
Correct.
Behind them.
This is an absolute disaster. That you can pull your way out of it, it would be a miracle. And the only thing that can fix that is money. There's no catching up. It's just a money hose. And at the time, what was the starting budget of the film, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm going to guess. There was one point at which we were actually looking at another director. This, I guess he was Norwegian. His name was Niels Gaup. Mm-hmm. And he was, a talented indie guy, but, he was not. This was where they were thinking, we're going to make this thing for 60 million or something. Well, we'll really contain it. By the time we got, movie stars in and stuff, it was up there. It was, pushing whatever, 80, 90. Ultimately, I think the budget was 175, which made it the most expensive movie of all time for 5 minutes, because it was immediately eclipsed by like 30 other movies, including that the Batman one with Schwarzenegger and Clooney and all.
Oh, Batman and Robin, which was just
yeah. The Above the Line alone was like 60 million on that,
Right.
So it was like, short-lived record for the most expensive movie of all time. But, that's not the only reason it became a punching bag. It also coincided with, as you said, Costner himself was, wielding this enormous power, and yet he was very vulnerable. His marriage was falling apart. There was some scandal involving, some affair that he had in Hawaii, and and the press just decided, let's go to town. Here's a good story. They're over budget. Heaven. What they call it, Kevin's Gate for a while. Or
Yeah, Kevin's Gate instead of Heaven's Gate. Yeah.
Fish Tar.
Oh,
This is great. This is a story.
Fish Tar.
Everyone ran that. And then that story turned out to be a myth, and we're going to get to that, which is ultimately, that Waterworld.
The legacy of it. All right, so you're going on set, so everyone hates you. What else happened on that day when you were there?
I, went out on the boat and hung out with Costner, and we chatted, and Hopper, I think, was in the scene, or maybe I saw him earlier or whatever, and it was all very pleasant, and it was exciting for me, but, ultimately it was. It was a mixed blessing. On the one hand, I was super pumped and super excited, and also I was heartsick. I was heartsick because I was realizing that the essence of what I had written was not really in there. Chuck Gordon had told me it as much, but I was also feeling it. I was sensing it. They had made a series of choices that were really kind of taking the heart out of the movie a little bit and just making it kind of, edgy in kind of the wrong way, in my opinion. So it was like, okay, I stayed there for a week. I went to the set a couple times, and then I went home.
So you're 27 or around that age, and you're walking on, at the time, the most expensive movie ever made, and it's your script. That has to be a thrill. Regardless of the punching bag, regardless of the press, I would be so excited. And it's just such a massive film, like the size of it. On the water, and it was a fairly epic film to be shot.
It was. I have to say that I think two moments in that story were bigger than that. When I actually sold that script, spec script, and there was like a little bit of a bidding war and everything, and I was part of that, whole spec script thing. That moment for me was like, oh, I made it. This is great. My dream, And I remember that Christmas, it was just before Christmas in '89, that my father was coming out to visit,
yeah.
And he, I just ended up renting like a limo and picking him up at the airport with a limo and champagne and stuff. It was a lot of fun. I was 27, I was so young and so unprepared for that voyage, and the set moment, had this kind of bittersweet feeling to it. And then ultimately, then finally the third moment was the premiere, this huge Hollywood premiere at the Mann's Chinese. And, again, another limo and, this whole thing. And, I brought like 20 friends, and that was really exciting. And again, it was a mixed feeling there. The first part of it was super exciting. Kevin Reynolds' idea to deconstruct the Universal logo. Here you have the Universal logo, the globe, and the letters wrapping around, and then they float away, and you see the globe, and you see the continents disappearing. Mm-hmm. You end up zooming in on the world, and it's all water, and then whoosh, you come in on Kevin's, on the trimaran. Mm-hmm. I was like, oh my God, that is a great moment. Like, they nailed it. And then, the first scene of the movie was the first scene of every draft that was written, which never changed, was my scene, which is he pisses, puts it into a contraption, filters it, and he drinks his own urine. That tells you visually, sets up the whole movie without having to say any words,
Which
so
is,
I really love that.
Which is, and I want to just jump on that for a second, because as opposed to a lot of writers will write, because you needed to establish what was going on in a very quick and efficient way. I can't think of another way that you could have done it better. Obviously, because after 400 writers or however many people wrote on it, they didn't change that because it was so well constructed. Because without one word, you're right. This is a water world. There's no land, and fresh water seems to be an issue.
Yeah. It's interesting. A friend of my son's goes to USC Film School and was taking a sort of intro screenwriting class, and I forgot the professor's name, but basically he was talking about grabbing the audience in the first 5 minutes and setting up the scenes. And he said, "Who here knows the opening of Waterworld?" He actually used Waterworld as a case study, and of course, no one raised their hand, but this one kid, my son's friend, knew the film and said, "I do." And it was that scene, that idea of just, the economy of really, setting up the whole thing and just, visually.